undertake studies in universities and higher education institutions in the ASEAN region and beyond, and particularly in Malaysia. We also have a deep research collaboration, and our publications between Malaysian institutions and ANU, particularly in the sciences, physics, chemistry, material and environmental sciences. On the humanities side, ANU established the ANU Malaysian Institute in 2016, which has already carried out significant research into Malaysian history, sociology, politics, economics and law. And we have just witnessed the signing of an MOU between our university and the Malaysian Institute for Strategic and International Studies. Minister Wong, I am really delighted to have you here at ANU today, and it is my pleasure to introduce the Minister, who will then introduce the Malaysian Prime Minister. As you will know, Minister Wong was born in Malaysia. She began her education in Malaysia and emigrated to Australia at the tender age of 8. Her father had been an original Colombo Plan scholar studying at the University of Adelaide. Minister Wong continued her education in South Australia. She graduated with an arts law degree from the University of Adelaide and then practiced as a lawyer in Adelaide. And might I say, what a very fine pedigree that is for a future foreign minister. Penny was then elected to the Senate in 2001, and this year, today, she is the longest serving female cabinet minister in Australia's history. She has had responsibility for the significant portfolios of climate change, finance, and now foreign affairs. And while we were in different political parties, in fact, we were in different parliamentary chambers, our paths crossed often in the field of foreign affairs. I found her to be a thoroughly decent, committed, and fair colleague. She is a formidable politician with a sharp intellect and wit, but she is unrelenting in her focus on better outcomes for our nation and in the national interest. Minister Wong, as our chief diplomat, faces a very challenging, often unpredictable, and highly contested environment, and it requires a deep understanding of the historic and current events that shape this environment, and the need for an ability to deftly navigate the environment regionally and internationally. In Minister Wong, we have a diplomat who is able to do that with much ability. A child of Malaysia, Australia's Foreign Minister, please welcome Minister Penny Wong.
Thank you very much, and I also begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of this land and paying my respect to elders past and present, and acknowledging and welcoming any other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people attending here today. I also acknowledge the many distinguished guests, including members of the Diplomatic Corps. I acknowledge and thank Prime Minister Anwar and Dr. Wan Aziza for being here. I acknowledge my counterpart, the Malaysian Minister for Foreign Affairs, Tok Mat. Thank you for being here. And the Malaysian Minister for Youth and Sport, Hannah Yeoh. It's wonderful to have you here as well. It's a very great pleasure to be here at the Gareth Evans oration. I acknowledge the man himself, as well as his successor and my predecessor, Julie Bishop. And if I can thank Julie very much for her generous introduction and for her service to this country. I think on the list of longest serving women in a cabinet. She was second and I think is now third. So myself, Amanda Vanstone and Julie Bishop, it's a group of which I'm very proud to be part, alongside you. I have to say, having a couple of esteemed foreign ministers here did feel a little bit like coming back to university for a lecture, but presenting to professors. But luckily, the Prime Minister of Malaysia is the one who is presenting, and he is more than equipped for this task. I thank you, Prime Minister, for being here for this oration. And I thank you again publicly for being here in Australia for the ASEAN-Australia Special Summit, which concluded in Melbourne. We are most grateful for your presence. You honour us with your presence in our country. I'll introduce the Prime Minister in just a moment, but if I may first say something briefly about Gareth Evans. Gareth has never seen any inherent limit in the potential for Australian influence in our region or the world. You see, we're not one of the great powers. We're not a country that has to be listened to or worked with because of the sheer size of population, economy, military or industrial weight. But like our Southeast Asian neighbours, our size does not reflect how much we have to offer our region and the world. But it does mean we have to be more clever about how we advance our interests in peace, in stability and in prosperity. We have to be more strategic in how we ensure our region enjoys a strategic balance where countries which are small or medium-sized are not dominated by the major powers, a region in which we can all decide our own destinies. Gareth Evans was never limited by the assumption of a small Australia, and his capacity for influence is perhaps no more evident than in his work to bring together the 1991 Paris Peace Agreements that helped bring peace to Cambodia, and our creative role in those talks and our support for the UN Transitional Authority in Cambodia is still spoken of in the highest terms by the Cambodian government, by opposition groups, by citizens and civil society and so many others across our region and the world. It was and it remains one of Australia's greatest diplomatic achievements. And it is a template for doing what I describe as taking the world as it is and shaping it for the better. And I hope you in this room will be part of this legacy of shaping the next stage or steps in this legacy in the years to come. And of course, we have another great statesman here with us today, Malaysia's Prime Minister, Anwar Ibrahim. And I'll begin by recognising you join us on the eve of the 10th anniversary of the disappearance of MH370. And while the searches have not been successful and families continue to endure heartache, the effort to find MH370 demonstrates the close cooperation between our countries through difficult times. Mr. Prime Minister, I'm a proud Sabahan Australian. And it is a singular honour to have the opportunity to introduce the Malaysian Prime Minister here today. And it is an honour to introduce you. And I want to, in doing so, recognise the profound influence you have had not only on Malaysia, but more broadly on the development of democracy across the region. You've survived your own particular political purgatory. But notwithstanding the political and personal difficulties you have faced, you have never lost your influence. Indeed, you have only become more influential and your ability to inspire has become even greater. So without detracting in any way from your past, present and future achievements in office, I would venture so far as to describe you as one of that vanishingly rare species of political leader who has been profoundly influential not only in office but in opposition. Not only when you've held the levers of national power, but also, most decidedly, when you have not. The Prime Minister has had the courage to live the life of a true democrat, and he has shaped the character of the national and regional polity in profound ways. Malaysia, Australia, all the countries of our region have our own paths. Many nations shaped by powerful independence personalities whose lives will forever be tied to the struggle of their nations for freedom and self-rule. You, sir, though, have played a unique role in Malaysia's history, in the development of its democracy, its political practice, and the way it defines its own path in Southeast Asia. You've been an advocate for respect and tolerance in troubling times, a message we should emphasise today. And we both live in countries that have communities deeply affected by the conflict in the Middle East. And while neither of our countries are in the Middle East, we both have voices which are respected there. So it is so important for us all to continue to use our voices to advocate for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire and humanitarian access, the release of hostages and the protection of civilians. To use our voices for a pathway out of this conflict and an enduring peace for an independent Palestinian state alongside the State of Israel, just as we continue to promote peaceful and respectful dialogue at home. Regrettably, here in Australia, we see some who claim to champion human rights and justice behaving in ways that show little regard for either. Shocking attempts at intimidation and character assassination, blatant anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. There are some intent on reproducing hatred and social conflict here, pushing absolutist agendas ahead of respect for peaceful disagreement that healthy democracy demands. We are not a country where we are pushed to adopt an absolutist position of one side or another side. We are a pluralist country, allowing for many different viewpoints, where we are united by respect for each other's humanity and for each other's right to live in peace. Prime Minister, across the years, you have been a great friend to Australia and to Australians. And I am hopeful that this next stage in Australia-Malaysia relationships is one where we see further cooperation across so many areas, but not the least to support your own personal goal of strengthening Malaysia's democratic institutions. Democracy is always a work in progress. And progress comes with many setbacks, as all of us know, perhaps you more than most. But democracy's enduring wisdom lies in its ability to evolve, to tackle new challenges as human society itself continues to change. So we thank you, Prime Minister, for coming today, for returning to Australia. Please know the esteem with which you are held here, how welcome you are as a guest in our country, and how honoured we are to host you here today. As the Malaysian saying goes, "Ke bukit sama didaki, ke lura sama dituruni." So in that spirit of friendship and respect, Datuk Sri, I invite you to the podium to deliver the 2024 Gareth Evans Oration.
Assalamu alaikum and a very good afternoon. Thank you, Minister Penny Wong, for that brilliant introduction. I think if you don't mind, I will seek permission from Albanese to borrow you for a few weeks to help campaign in Malaysia. And thank you again. And thank you, Chancellor Julie Bishop, and my great friend, Gareth Evans. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to begin by acknowledging the Nun Nawal and Nambri people, traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. I'm delighted to be back here at ANU. I've been here a couple of times, instigating students and conspiring an institution of consequence to this country and the broader region. When the ANU was established in 1946, its pioneers naturally envisaged that it would serve to advance higher education. More than that, the Australian government vested the ANU with a vital mission of broadening and deepening this country's understanding of what we now call the Asia-Pacific, thereby helping to define Australia's place in global affairs. In introducing the bill establishing the university, the Australian Minister for Post-War Reconstruction at the time said that Australia's relations with its neighbors and partners, quote, must be carefully studied in order that they may become friendly and fruitful, as they must be if our future is to be safeguarded and if we are to make our full contribution in the councils of the nations. Almost 8 decades later, the study of Australia's external strategic environment is evidently being spearheaded on this campus, as we witness the extensive Asian collections of the Menzies Library and the tremendous scholarly output across the board, leaving no one in doubt as to why this university remains a leading center for Pacific and Asian studies. It is indeed a great honor to deliver this oration named after a great, difficult friend, Gareth Evans. As Foreign Minister of Australia from 1988 to 1996, Gareth was one on the front lines of diplomacy at a pivotal moment for this region and the world. The end of the Cold War led to political and economic shifts that swept away old certainties. It presented new risks and opportunities for countries like Australia. And Gareth was there to make sure that Australia strategically adapted to that new world, including through the creation of APEC. I have very little choice. When he instructed me to come and attend this lecture, he assumed there is still Foreign Minister instructing one of his members of the staff. And this is no exaggeration, by the way. We have a lot of stories together. We were in New York together some years back, and then with the permanent rep, an Australian permanent rep, and he was giving instructions as if that permanent rep was his former PA, and remained so. So you can appreciate my predicament. It is therefore fitting for me to take this opportunity to speak about how Malaysia and Australia can work together and navigate yet another pivotal moment in our region's history. For despite the tyranny of distance, the destinies of our two countries have long been intertwined, right from the beginnings of Malaysia itself. Malaysia won't forget the heroism of the Anzac breed. As Prime Minister John Curtin said in March 1942, our men stormed Gallipoli. They swept through the Libyan desert. They were the Reds of Tobruk. They were the men who fought under the bitter, sarcastic, pugnacious Gordon Bennett down Malaya and were still fighting when the surrender of Singapore came. From the tragedy of the Sandakan death marches to the defense of Malaysia against threats of the Cold War, foreign and domestic, all existential, Malaysia will remember that Australia was there for us. Thank you. Economic relations between Malaysia and Australia have grown from strength to strength in recent years, based on mutual geo-economic interests and the pursuit of regional prosperity. Last year, our trade was valued at about 27 billion Australian dollars, cementing Malaysia's position as Australia's second largest ASEAN trading partner. Globally, we are Australia's 10th largest trading partner. Beyond that, Malaysia and Australia are parties to 4 economic frameworks, including the world's largest FTA, namely the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership and the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. These signal our joint interest in facilitating trade and investment across this dynamic region. We are also heartened by the fact, by the trade-focused components of Australia's recent Southeast Asia economic strategy, which recognizes the need to deepen such collaboration between Australia and ASEAN amid growing geopolitical uncertainty. Nationally, Malaysia is on track with its new Industrial Master Plan and Madani Economic Framework, outlining similar priority areas alongside SEAS. In the years to come, new opportunities will emerge for Australian investors in digitalization, renewable energy, and energy transition, agro-processing, and the downstream of chemical and mineral products, coinciding with Malaysia's push towards becoming a complex, advanced economy. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a recent hallmark in our relationship, formally categorized as a strategic partnership, is its elevation to a comprehensive strategic partnership, which reaffirms our strong bilateral ties with cooperation cutting across multiple spheres, often stretching beyond the traditional economic, diplomatic, security, and cultural ties. More importantly, it also emphasizes shared regional aspirations and the intent to cooperate strategically on a multilateral level. It has become an understatement to say that we now live in unsettled times. A sense of foreboding has seeped into discourse on the future of our region. This stands in stark contrast to how we spoke about the Asia-Pacific at the turn of this century. At the time, there was a clear consensus that the principal challenge emanated from non-traditional threats. This was an era where terrorism repeatedly reared its ugly head with the tragedies of 9/11 and the 2002 Bali bombings. On the economic front, there was broad agreement that cross-border trade and investment would help build interdependence and moderate rivalries. Our pet peeves were relatively benign quarrels over market access, tariffs, and quotas. Yet, I recount that juncture in recent history to underline how fundamental assumptions about preserving peace and prosperity in our region have altered. Globalization is decidedly under assault. Economic interdependence is now seen as indicative of duress, or worse, of buckling under the weight of coercion. For some countries, the preservation of stability warrants nothing less than a more muscular approach towards international affairs. Our responses to the rise of China will be a critical determinant of whether our region will be characterized by détente or discord. To tailor our strategies effectively, we need to adopt measures of empathy, to put ourselves in their shoes, to see how others see us. For the leaders of China, it is only natural for them to be more forthright in assessing their interests. A growing economy naturally leads to greater diplomatic influence and a more formidable military. In their eyes, the adverse reactions to China's rise, militarily, economically, and technologically, represent nothing less than an attempt to deny their legitimate place in history. The obstacles being placed against China's economic and technological advancement will only further accentuate such grievances. Nevertheless, we are confronted with a situation of contending perceptions. I do not for one moment suggest that we may turn a blind eye to a behavior or action that is not in consonance with international law and norms. It is also crucial that you understand the profound changes that have taken place in the United States. The past 30 years have been a period in which key parts of the American industrial base have been thoroughly hollowed out. The collapse of the working class in the United States is one of the most consequential societal shifts in our era. Globalization has not worked for them in the way it has for workers of Asia. The long wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have exacted an immense toll on the psyche of the people. The upshot is a preference for leaders who are more transactional with the rest of the world, those who profess to put America first. We are also going through fundamental shifts in global assumptions about what society should aspire to be. For over 150 years, at least since the Meiji Restoration of 1868, it became the immutable truth that, that to be modern or even civilized was to become Western. Today, a chasm in developing between what we now call the global North and the global South. We therefore need to start accepting that the global South now see multiple pathways for advancing their societies, and not just those prescribed or endorsed by the global North. Accordingly, we should not take for granted that Western perspectives on the future world order would be embraced universally. There is growing impatience with how global institutions are failing to reform themselves. Designed in the aftermath of the Second World War, the United Nations Security Council and the Bretton Woods institutions reflect a world that is now long gone. The Washington Consensus is gradually eroding, if not altogether disappeared. We should therefore not be surprised when forums such as BRICS start to gain purchase. If one avenue for asserting new realities is impeded, others will take its place. But we should be wary when these take the form of mini-lateralism, because it could have the unintended consequence of fomenting suspicions rather than bridging differences. It is therefore crucial that we look at ways to enhance, the Australians say enhance, right? The Americans say enhance. Enhance multilateral institutions and other arrangements that are inclusive by design. There can be no easy and straightforward response to our present circumstances, for they are immensely complex. They are rooted in vexed questions about the rightful place of societies in the world and in history, their dignity and their livelihoods. It boils down to fundamental questions of values and identity. For many countries, a natural response to these changes is to build their defenses and strengthen their network of strategic relationships. For Australia, this has principally manifested itself in building a more potent naval capacity. We will also chart new paths for expanding bilateral relations, bilateral ties in areas such as artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. At the same time, I believe that Malaysia and Australia have a duty to try the utmost to encourage the United States, China, and other major players in the Asia-Pacific to conduct themselves in a manner that is conducive to the enhancement of regional cooperation and economic integration. For hard-headed realists, it has become fashionable to assert that major power rivalry has become a structural feature for regional affairs and nothing can be done to moderate it. I do not accept this fatalistic view of the world. Working on our respective strengths and unique relationship with the major countries in this region, we can achieve something of profound consequence for the Asia-Pacific. I therefore invite Malaysia's key partners, including Australia, of course, to work closely with us on revitalizing regional cooperation and integration. As chair of ASEAN in 2025, Malaysia will attempt to breathe new life into ASEAN-led forums, such as East Asia Summit, the ASEAN Regional Forum, and the ADMM+. The path ahead will not be easy. A degree of inertia has unfortunately set in. There's a deep-seated conservatism, an assumption that little can be done. But this is not the moment to be faint-hearted. I believe that with enough will and support from our partners, we'll be able to achieve something of consequence. There is bound to be cynicism about the value of ASEAN in a more divided region. But it is precisely when chasms are growing that we need to double down on ASEAN. Without it, the region will be principally dictated by the calculations and designs of the major powers, unfettered by the need to account for a more diverse range of interests and viewpoints. For Malaysia, ASEAN acts as a multiplier, an indispensable platform for the countries of Southeast Asia to exercise their agency. Irrelevance, decay, or reversal are not acceptable options. ASEAN's advancement is at the core of our strategic interests. Finally, Malaysia and Australia have an advantage. We have a foreign minister and two former foreign ministers, having to listen attentively. Thank you. Malaysia and Australia have high stakes in upholding the sanctity of international law. It is only by adhering to universally recognized sources of international law, whether it is the United Nations Charter or the UNCLOS, that we will be able to keep the sharp edges of interstate interactions with certain limits. Nor should we be selective in our application of international law. Unfortunately, the gut-wrenching tragedy that continues to unfold in the Gaza Strip has laid bare the self-serving nature of much valued, much vaunted rules-based order. The differing responses by the West to human suffering defy reasoning. Why, for example, has the West been so vociferous, vehement, and unequivocal in the condemnation of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, while remaining utterly silent on the relentless bloodletting inflicted on the innocent men, women, and children of Gaza? Sure, there are exceptions, but they are few and far between. The fact is, much of the Western world has given the Israeli occupation forces for more than 6 decades a carte blanche in their murderous rampage on the Palestinians. When South Africa took Israel to the International Court of Justice and the Genocide Convention, some countries decried it as counterproductive. But what could be more consistent with any reasonable conception of a rule-based order than an appeal to those very rules before a panel of 17 judges? Ladies and gentlemen, as we strive to build a more peaceful and economically vibrant region, I believe it's a fool's errand to think that the liberal international order and the inconsistencies in the application of principles, rules, and norms will go unnoticed. Nor should we descend into cynicism and declare that no country can ever be fully consistent in international affairs. Consistency matters. International law matters. So does a commitment to fair play and mutual respect among nations. It is imperative that Malaysia and Australia pool our political and diplomatic resources to these aims. Our respective capabilities and attributes present numerous possibilities. Malaysia and Australia may not see the region and the world in identical terms, but our ultimate aims are the same. The specifics of our strategies may diverge, but we can still pursue parallel policies in promoting regional cooperation and integration. Ultimately, our shared objective should be to foster a region that is resilient to power shifts while preserving every country's autonomy regardless of size. We must invest in institutions that will enable us to adapt to change peacefully without denying any nation of their rightful place in the global community. Allow me to end this oration with a message of hope. And in this regard, I can do no better than to share the first stanza, A Song of Hope, by the inimitable activist, poet, and educator Udgiru Nun Nungkal, Keith Walker. Look up, my people. The dawn is breaking. The world is waking to a bright new day. When none defame us, no restrictions tame us, no color shame us, no sneer dismay. Terima kasih.
Well, what a huge honour and privilege it's been to listen to this wonderful oration by my old colleague and friend, Anwar Ibrahim. Particularly for me, normally one has to wait until one's past life's final checkout before you get anything named after you. So I'm deeply grateful to ANU for giving me this opportunity to enjoy, while I'm still alive, just a small taste of the obituaries that will hopefully follow. Although I do have to say, I hope that some of my obituaries, when the real one comes, are a little bit more hagiographical than the one you managed today. It's been a particular privilege for all of us to have had Foreign Minister Penny Wong with us today, as Chancellor Julie Bishop so well said. She has to leave us now for another commitment, but as she goes, please join me in just a moment in thanking her warmly, not only for her presence and what she's headed here today, not only for the wonderful mentoring role she's played over the years, as now, as you've just heard, the longest-serving Australian female foreign minister, cabinet minister, but to thank her also for the brilliant job she does continue to do as Australia's face and voice internationally. So thank you so much, Penny. We won't allow Anwar himself to escape without taking a few questions from the floor. And if you can perhaps now start thinking about what you might want to ask him and moving down eventually to the microphones that are on either side of the hall when you'll have that opportunity. But I do want to say first a few more words of thanks of my own to our honoured guest. Back in those days long ago when I was Foreign Minister and you were Malaysia's Finance Minister and Deputy Prime Minister, and I was, back in the days when I was still on speaking terms with Rupert Murdoch, I do remember telling Rupert at a function we both were attending in Davos or somewhere that you were the smartest thing on two legs in Asia. And seeing Rupert immediately rush off to buttonhole you accordingly. I've never had cause to regret that description. And Anwar, you've certainly shown today that you haven't lost your touch. Intellectual political leaders are a pretty rare breed. And the story of how you overcame the barriers to high office posed both by your intelligence and your decency is a truly extraordinary one. Supported always along the way by your wonderful wife, Wan Aziza, who I'm also delighted to acknowledge her presence here today. You've careered over the years, the last 40 years, from street protests to the centre of power, then back to street protests, legal persecution, custodial torture, repression, then finally, triumphantly, ground your way back to high politics and ultimately the apex of power. I'm in awe, and I think we're all in awe of that achievement. No one who has any sense of the continuing complexities of Malaysian domestic politics will underestimate the degree of difficulty involved for you now in walking that tightrope in government and implementing all the reform strategies to which you remain manifestly so intellectually and emotionally committed. And I certainly, and I think we all certainly, wish you well for the battles that lie ahead in that respect. But your oration today has, of course, been primarily about walking another tightrope, an international one with which all the rest of us in the region are acutely familiar, walking that tightrope between our two neighbourhood giants, China and the United States. Although what you've been saying in Melbourne earlier this week, what you've said again today, has been generating and no doubt will continue to generate some rather overexcited commentary from various quarters. My own view, for what it's worth, is that you have the balance pretty well exactly right. We all have to recognise that China is a massive economic and military power, wanting its own space and influence, that it's not going away, and that as much as we welcome the United States' presence in the region, as much as we're deeply grateful for the continuing role of the US alliance here in Australia, the reality is the days of uncontested United States primacy in our region can no longer be sustained. What we all want, as Penny Wong has put it, is a region in which no country dominates and no country is dominated. And I believe that's an aspiration around which all the rest of us in ASEAN and Australia and beyond, although each of us will, as you've said, articulate our national interests in different ways, that's an aspiration around which we can all genuinely unite. No one wants war. No one wants trade war. All of us none of us want to sacrifice, rather, our sovereign independence as we wrestle with the competing pressures that we are all feeling. I think we can, following what you've said, I think we can and should unite in particular in calling insistently on China and the United States to enter into a new détente, a word you used in your own oration. A détente of the kind which did calm passions between the United States and the Soviet Union in the last decades of the Cold War, a détente in which both sides pledge to treat each other as mutually respectful equals, disagreeing where they must, but cooperating where they can, and above all, pledging to resolve their differences peacefully. Both Malaysia and Australia, as you've intimated, as influential middle powers with a long record of working cooperatively together, we can both play important roles in that cause. What we've heard from you today, Anwar, is a voice of clarity, of principle and moderation, and long may that voice be heard. So thank you for all that you've stood for and accomplished, and will continue to. Thank you for visiting us here at ANU, and thank you for doing me the honour of delivering this oration. Thank you, Anwar. And thank you now for submitting yourself to some interrogation from the floor. So if we have people coming down to the mics or standing beside the mics, we can take it from there. Yes, you're the first question.
Good afternoon, Mr. Prime Minister. Thank you so much for coming to ANU. It's a great honour to be able to hear you speak today. My question revolves around what you see as the greatest challenge confronting the continued success of the ASEAN Forum as the region heads into a increasingly complex future.
The greatest challenge is, of course, to me, given the peace and stability in the region, to focus on the economy. Because finally, what is governance, what is politics, is the welfare of the common man and women. And sometimes the rancorous exchanges between leaders does not necessarily empathize with the actual problems confronted by the common man and women. So I think having said that, we'll have, of course, to deal with issues of, as I said, contending forces between United States and China in the region. Things, to my mind, is quite contained. There is an attempt to over-exaggerate, or neither do I want to trivialize. That is why I have called upon Australia and our colleagues in ASEAN to be more assertive in our message, both to the United States and China, to ensure that this region remains peaceful and stable. For what? Not for the leaders, in our experience, to squander, but to ensure that there's good governance and have policies, clarity of policies that would invariably help the people of our countries.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Next question.
Thank you. Hello, can I hear me all right? Thank you. Thank you, Garrett. First of all, Prime Minister, my name is Sam Wong. I live in Canberra for over 50 years. I'm a Hong Kong Chinese Australian. I think you touched my wife's hand, Chin Wong. She is a Sabahang Chinese Australian as well, and also Diana Raman. The reason I mentioned three of us, or with myself, some years ago, about maybe over 10 years ago, you have a visit to Australia. We share a meal together in Canberra,
Yes.
in a Turkish home. And we heard your aspiration, and at that time, you're not look too well, but now you look about 20 years younger. Congratulations. And also I'd like to special welcome to your wife and all your...
Great story, but can we have a question?
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm going on. The question is very simple. I very admire and your tenacity about your independent view and Malaysians' view of your foreign affairs regarding to China and to America, as Garrett similarly advocate for that. I just want to know, from your point of view, to continue this wonderful foreign policy, which I really supported. I live in Australia. I hope the government will listen to me or anybody else. How would you thinking long-term Malaysia and ASEAN will benefit for your thought and continue your good work? Thank you.
Now, cumulatively, United States remain the largest investor in Malaysia. No question about that. And we continue to attract. It's either number one or number two as compared to China. So, as a policy, is not discriminatory. We welcome, and we need the technology and the investors. But at the same time, you should not preclude, particularly in our strong bond of friendship with China. China has not created problems for us. It may create problems some others. Okay, fair. We can discuss. We can negotiate. But the issue is for countries to either express their concern when they believe that we are tilting or shifting. No, it is dealing with a stark reality. United States used to be the greatest, largest investor into Malaysia. Now China is beginning to be more active in their investments into Malaysia. We decide the terms. So I believe if countries in the region take the common stance and treat both in very friendly terms, it's not as easy because both may want to exert some influence to insist that we do support some of the policies. I think this is where the cohesion of ASEAN, the common stance in most issues, would be of immense help and benefit to the region.
Thanks. Next question.
Hello, Assalamualaikum, and Salam Satu Malaysia. So basically, my name is Juan, I'm from Sydney. So one question from you is that in the spirit of ASEAN, especially when we're celebrating the 50th anniversary and Malaysia being the chair in 2025, I just would like to resurface the idea of ZOPFAN, which is Zone of Peace, Freedom and Neutrality. How would you as a Prime Minister spearhead the idea of ZOPFAN, especially when Malaysia is one of the few countries that managed to hedge between the United States and China? And how would you lead that into, the idea of maintaining the zone, especially for smaller states in the ASEAN region themselves?
Well, I do not spearhead this to give credit to our forefathers who initiated the whole idea of ASEAN. Most of the countries in South Asia actually adopted this. Of course, there's shifting alliances, pressures, or national interests. We do understand that. But the general consensus in ASEAN is, of course, to retain this policy. And we do it together and through ASEAN, then in our engagement with the other countries, ASEAN has become quite a strategic regional body. It's the most peaceful, it is the most robust economically, highest growth, and huge potential in terms of investments. That's unrivaled in any sub-regions. Number two, although it's called ASEAN, we have ASEAN, Australia, ASEAN, New Zealand, ASEAN, China, East Asia, and ASEAN, United States, and Europe. And from last year, and inshallah next year, the Arab countries, GCC, have agreed to come to Malaysia, with Malaysia as host on behalf of ASEAN, for ASEAN GCC. So it's extending beyond the traditional notion of ASEAN. And our strength is therefore, because we are seen to be friendly to all parties, whilst maintaining our rule. I'm a Democrat. I believe strongly in democracy and freedom. But that's what we in Malaysia have to decide. I don't believe that we can impose or hector others when there's so much contradictions and hypocrisy abound in the so-called hectoring about democracy and human rights and freedom.
Thanks, Arman. Next question.
Datuk Si Perdana Menteri, pertama-tama terima kasih. Saya Risto, datang jauh-jauh dari Jakarta. I'll ask my question in English for the audience. I would be remiss not to note that last month has been 3 years since the beginning of the Myanmar crisis. I would be interested to know what Malaysia is doing within and without ASEAN to help resolve this crisis. As I understand, last year, during Indonesia's presidency, there is some sort of troika between the current, past, and future president, chair of ASEAN. So I would like to know what is Malaysia doing vis-a-vis Myanmar within and outside of ASEAN. Thank you.
Well, this is the unfortunate situation in ASEAN. I've taken very strong views, not only because we have 200,000 refugees from Rohingya, Myanmar, into Malaysia, but because of the continued atrocities against citizens in Myanmar. We take a very strong position. But whilst stating this, we will continue to engage, not officially, because we do not recognize the junta regime. They are not invited to attend ASEAN meetings. But we have recommended the countries, neighboring countries like Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, continue to engage at the level. And the Troika, Indonesia, Laos, and Malaysia has been entrusted by ASEAN to try and seek ways to engage with both parties in, or the main two parties in Myanmar, to secure an amicable resolution, which is not going to be easy, but I think we have to be more assertive and make things very clear. I don't see an immediate resolution, but as you know, in all my years of struggle and sufferings, I've always been an optimist. And therefore, I see no reason why we can't secure peace and understanding in Myanmar.
Amen to that. Next question.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for your oration. My question is: do you see there any way for middle powers in the Indo-Pacific to reverse the trend of geo-economic coercion the US and the Chinese are conducting?
You are dealing with two great nations with a great history, great struggle, and people sometimes tend to simplify the US foreign policy because what is happening at present and the contradictions and so-called hypocrisy, but they tend to forget that United States was, initially set up or formed after war independence as a very principled nation with clear policies on democracy and justice. And you read, for example, Jeffersonian ideals of the Pilgrim Fathers, clearly it is a firm belief in issues of human rights and honoring these high ideals. I used to quote, to my students to get them to read Tocqueville's Democracy in America, where he made clear reference to the issue of the habits of the heart, is not just political pious platitudes, but it is a thing that you believe in on the issue of human rights, or democracy, honor and dignity, and the right values, to then establish what is now known to be a democratic nation, where it does not necessarily mean that it is now being practiced. But I'm talking about the possibility of people, the younger generation, come back to the higher ideals and values of integrity, of compassion, and democracy, as was envisaged by the great leaders. China, for example, went through a hell lot of a difficult history of struggles, of sacrifice, and intimidation, atrocities committed by colonial powers. They have emerged. And that's why, to my mind, to continue to engage, we must. Of course, we are a small nation. It seems to be unsurmountable. But I still believe finally sanity has to prevail, because otherwise it will be disastrous consequences for our societies and countries. You know, we were in San Francisco for the APEC last few months. And there was a day after Xi Jinping had this meeting with President Biden. You know, general consensus was so, people, the leaders rejoiced. The whole idea that they at least are prepared to meet and discuss issues. Not too successful, not too great, but at least you can see the general sentiment. People want this settlement because it would mean so much for our people, for our economy, for stability in our region. So let's hope for the best.
Thank you. Next question.
Thank you. Thank you, Prime Minister, for your oration today. As an international relations student here at
Can you speak up a bit, please?
Sorry. As an international relations student here at ANU, your speech will be very useful for my assessments. My question consists of two parts, both relating to the future of ASEAN. The first is, what sort of reforms will we be spearheading in ASEAN to continue ensuring it's a partner of choice in the Asia-Pacific region? And my second question was, what do you see the future of Australia and ASEAN's relationship being, and would that potentially include membership?
ASEAN has grown to be a strong, cohesive regional body. Notwithstanding some limitations, and I will name you the limitations, but in terms of relations to ensure peace and order and working together in many fields, that is, again, as I said, as compared to most regional, sub-regional bodies, is rather unprecedented. We are now realizing the major limitation of flow. Intra-ASEAN trade. There's collaboration in most fields, but in investment and trade is somewhat to be lacking. And this is what, in one area which we need to explore and aggressively pursue now by the Lao chairmanship, and certainly next year when I chair. So I think with that, beyond the normal arrangements that we have heard, the relations between neighbors has been extremely good. Say, for example, Malaysia, Singapore, Philippines, Indonesia, in the south of Peninsula Malaya. We have now set up the special economic zone with Singapore, which is unheard of. No possibility we talk about two nations agreeing on one economic zone. With Prime Minister Seta of Thailand, who's been pursuing aggressively this collaboration to advance economic investments and development in South Thailand, which is a bit, tricky. Sometimes we have issues, contentious issues with the Muslim majority there, and North Malaya. And we have agreed that the solution is not military solution, but the economic development. This is again sub-regional arrangement between a part of Sumatra to North Malaya and South Thailand. So these things are moving on, and I think these are practical areas where we need to, within ASEAN, to foster and improve, including, as I say, intra-ASEAN trade development programs together, then with that strength, we have a better sort of a force to be able to negotiate with our neighbors. For example, before, at the initial stage of Australia-ASEAN, Australian, for example, economy was probably double the size of entire ASEAN. Now, ASEAN in itself is the entire strength, is double of that of Australia. So the potential is huge and enormous. Thank you.
Next question.
Bismillah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Prime Minister, my name is Jody. I'm an Indonesian student from Sumatera region. Throughout your life and career, you have undoubtedly faced many challenges, limitations, and restrictions. I want to learn from your experience. What kind of strategies do you have or philosophy in your life, and how can you inspire us to be better person of ourselves? And finally, Your Excellency, will it be an honor for me to take a photo with you later? Thank you.
Yes, 10 Australian dollars. No, I'm joking. Now, I'm not a good strategist. If I'm a good strategist, I wouldn't have ended up 10.5 years in solitary confinement in jail. and although all those years, this man here was a committed, reliable friend who worked so hard in defending me and campaigning for my release. Thank you, Gareth. So I would say this. Yes, as I said, tenacity of purpose. You believe, there's a strong conviction that you want to affect change, reform. I believe that Malaysia can be a great country. We were relatively more successful in the 1990s, but we inflicted by the general moral decadence and corruption, as we have seen from the theories of Ibn Khaldun to Toynbee's cyclical theory of civilization, to Gibbon's decline, fall of the Roman Empire. I mean, it's a great lesson of history, but leaders tend to forget. I'm not talking about political leaders alone. Any disastrous consequences is as a result of the elite, the academia, political leadership, the business community have lost their idealism and zeal. Now, I share the view that we have the capacity, and we have, it's a great nation. We have majority Malay Muslims, we have Chinese, we have Indians, we have Sabah, Sarawak, and we can work together, focus on what's best for our country through good governance, through strong passion for reform to champion the cause of our people. We can do this. And I'm grateful, of course, Aziza and my family was with me, and many loyal colleagues. And now we are able to form this strong coalition with even desperate forces in the past, but with a clear aim. Yes, we have differences in the past. We fought at each other in the past, but we are all determined to effect change, that we can use our majority in parliament, our strength, to try and alter the course of history. And inshallah, we'll be able to do that. Selfie, yes, you can do it later.
Next question.
It's Daniel Hurst from The Guardian. Prime Minister, you set out quite a firm critique about selective application of international law when it comes to Israel's operations in Gaza. Are you including Australia in that critique? What specific levers would you like Australia to pull? And what's your message to Australia and other donors as they consider whether to reinstate funding to UNRWA?
Thank you. Yeah, it's timely because Penny Wong has left.
She has. You can tell us what you think now.
No, I did give a credit to Australia, New Zealand, and Canada because they have somewhat shifted from the original stance and called for ceasefire and humanitarian assistance. And partly because of the events. We knew it because it's not as the narrative and the mantra of 7th of October. The atrocities have happened from Nakba in 1947, and you seem to be blinded to erase that part of history. And so the whole issue is on from the 7th of October. But never mind. We may have differences in that, but at least stop, for goodness sake, stop the killings of children, women, and civilians. And now I think Australia is on board, consistently calling for this. I have appealed to Prime Minister Albanese to say that West Indian investigations can carry on. We're not stopping. But assist UNRWA, because UNRWA is most effective on the ground to help the besieged civilians and food, medical, and housing.
You made that
fully they respond. Yeah, I did raise
made that directly to him when you met him the other day.
Yeah, he was very attentive, very polite, as most good politicians. But it's for the Australian government to decide ultimately. But to be fair, right? I sometimes forget that I'm now Prime Minister. I'm speaking as an opposition leader.
Okay.
To be fair, in my exchanges with him, he listened very attentively and allowed me to present my case very strongly on the issue of Gaza, and because we have been consistent even on the issue of Ukraine. We are not selective. It's not politics of ambivalence. To me, it must be a consistent, coherent message, and hopefully he will respond. Thank you.
Hello, Prime Minister. Thank you very much for your speech. You've hit a rich vein of journalists now, because I'm Ben Westcott from Bloomberg. I want to ask, you mentioned investment as a major factor in ASEAN, an important thing you'd like to see built under your chairmanship of ASEAN. However, some international investors have been a little disappointed with the speed of reforms under your government, particularly on things like subsidies, for instance. Do you have any sort of update on the timelines for those reforms, or any words for investors who might be feeling shaky confidence?
Well, positively, the response by the captains of industry has been quite positive. Yesterday, I announced another 24 billion ringgit new investments into Malaysia from Australia. This morning, I was at Invest Australia, Invest ASEAN, a session with the captains of industry, and they asked me some questions for clarification, ease of doing business, clarity of policies that have been done. On subsidy rationalization, we have done it. Electricity, water, but it takes time. This is the problem with countries. So yes, it makes lots of economic sense to stop all subsidies. You remember IMF prescriptions during the 98 crisis. If you do it abruptly without giving time to explain, to get people to understand, there will be political upheaval. There must be this sort of understanding. Is there a commitment? Yes. Have we done it? Yes. There is even a Financial Responsibility Act, which means surrendering the power of the Minister of Finance to the Parliament to debate on policies. And this, to my mind, is a major departure from a more semi-authoritarian sort of arrangement. But there are a series of subsidies have been done. The electricity subsidy, but of course we'll be careful. 85% of our people should not be punished. The richest, withdrawing subsidy, we're not increasing tariff, just withdraw subsidy. And of course there are foreigners too. So we have done it. Water rates have increased. Some provinces have not increased water rates for the last 40 years, and we have done it. So I think give us a break, do it. But for sure, subsidy rationalization is a must. I inherit 1.5 trillion debt for Malaysia. I inherit 5.6% deficit. In 1 year, we reduce to 5%. We continue the reducing. And that, to my mind, is a major commitment. Because to be a populist prime minister, never mind. Why do I worry? 1.5, we increase to 1.7 trillion. The next generation is going to pay. but I think it's an irresponsible policy. So we will have to gradually reduce. But if it is too drastic, you punish the common man or women. In that, I can't accept. You see, so we'll do it. I mean, there's no turning back. We have announced that, and we've been hammered by the opposition. Fortunately, the opposition is getting smaller. But the opposition happens to be from Islamic party. So it's not a matter of economic rationalization. It is whether it's halal or haram, or you go to hell or go to heaven. I have assured them, I'm quite confident going to heaven.
We've got
with the right prescriptions, of course.
Got just 5 minutes left for questions, so I'm afraid we're not going to get to all of you. But next question.
Olivia Casely from Sky News, thank you very much for your speech. Former Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott says that in 2014, about a week or so after MH370 vanished, he was informed at the highest levels of the Malaysian government that authorities suspected that it was a mass murder-suicide at the hands of the pilot, Captain Zahari, a political supporter and distant relative of yours. Why was this theory not canvassed publicly by your predecessor? And is the Malaysian government willing to fund a new search based on the deliberate crash theory, which involved a different flight path that was not included in the original search zone?
Decisions like this must be based on facts, not conjectures. You know, our Minister of Transport have announced clearly that we have a compelling case to reopen the investigations. We will. And tomorrow morning we'll have a cabinet session, and we'll hear his side of the story. And I'm inclined to support reopening of the investigations of MH370. But the inference that the captain, the pilot, was a supporter of Anwar, and that was the day I was again convicted and sent to jail, and therefore he must have been very depressed. I mean, this is the conjectures. So I tell you, so many taxi drivers were also depressed that day, thousands of them, because my base was the strongest supporter of taxi drivers in Kuala Lumpur, and no accident after that. So I think we might go back to the facts and probably conduct proper investigations, and we are open. I mean, this is transparent investigations, and the Australians have been very forthcoming, very supportive of that. Just a short qualification, because I was joking about this hell and heaven. I get into lots of trouble with Islamic party. They say, how do you know that you're going to heaven? So I was just joking about it.
Dear Anwar, I'm a big supporter of you, and I really respect you. But I just want to remind you that election is just around the corner. You have promised us many reformasi, and we have walked with you to the streets with Bersih. It is very sad to see certain things like police being set up in Bersih's office and things like that happening. What kind of actual reformasi do you hope to see before the next general election? Because I am worried that you will lose support, and these other oppositions who govern with I do not know what sense of education will come into power. So what kind of reformasi do you promise us as Malaysians? Because I want to go back to my country, and I don't want to be here. I want to look for jobs in Malaysia, and I want Malaysia to be better than Singapore at every single aspect.
Thank you. Especially the last part. But you know, with Singapore, we don't have the phobia anymore. We are now complementing each other. We are working very well together. That's why we have a common economic zone for Malaysia, Singapore in Johor. We have a financial hub, financial zone in Johor, and complementing the work of Singapore. So I think just to emphasize on that point. Now, the issue of reform, we are, because it takes time. You know, this is the first time in decades that you have suddenly a new setup. It's a multiracial, multi-religious coalition. I mean, there has been in the past, but your point is how can we then accelerate the pace of reform? I agree. We are trying whatever best, but you know, many subsidy rationalization is one. Amending laws. In fact, this session, we are amending a basic law, the term parent must include mother. It has always been father in the past. I mean, well, it sounds simple, but it's so, I should say, controversial by some quarters. But we are still doing it. And then there are umpteen laws. I mean, my Minister Manasan and Anna, you was here. We're doing it. Even separation of SG and AG. I mean, but it will take time because we've got to go through the Parliamentary Select Committee and debate. But let me assure you this. We are determined. There's no turning back. You know, this country, this government is a government committed to reform. And it's not because what we promise. To me, if Malaysia is to succeed as a great country again, it has to affect major reforms that is direly needed for our country. But we have started, for example, with issue of governance. Is it not surprising that after 1 year and 3 months, not one single scandal involving ministers in terms of amassing wealth or involving contracts? Is it not something new that every single procurement is through proper tender exercise? Well, this may be something normal to you, but it's not in our case. Hundreds of cases. People say Anwar has an axe to grind, going after some old leaders. I mean, I don't care whether you're old or young or for whatever party. You're corrupt, You steal billions of dollars, return back to the people. It's not my money, it's the people's money. We must get that back. But I'm proud to say that today, after 1 year and 3 months, not one case. The opposition can talk about many issues. They were not as Islamic, my beard is not long enough, whatever. But they cannot raise the issue of governance because I'm tough on that, without exception. And I think this is a measure that must, credit must be given to the entire team because they are all committed to this. And it's not easy. When people are easy, you know, political party is getting lots of money to disburse, and suddenly we're all stuck with a new reform agenda. It's not easy. From the distant observer, it may look easy, but it's just tough because people are familiar with a certain culture, and suddenly you put a block to that. But, as I said, we don't have a choice. We have given our commitment, we will do it. But we have to do it wisely because if we tend to just submit to the pressures of one or two groups, then we will fail ultimately. Thank you.
Anwar, you've been wonderfully generous with your time. I'm afraid that'll have to be the last question. Thanks so much again for being so generous in your responses to questions. Thanks so much for the quality and intensity and passion with which you delivered that oration. This is a relationship that we cherish with your country, with you personally, and your presence here today has done wonderful things to consolidate that relationship. Can I now call upon our Chancellor, Julie Bishop, to wrap things up once and for all. Julie, over to you.
Thank you, Gareth. Ladies and gentlemen, it has indeed been our honour to host the Malaysian Prime Minister here today. Prime Minister, we are grateful for your presence. We are privileged to have you here. We thank you for your frank and honest assessment of the challenges facing our region and the globe. We admire your tenacity, and while the jury might be out on where Gareth and I end up, I'm pleased that the path forward for you is clear. And we wish you and your delegation a safe journey home. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank Professor Gareth Evans for his astute handling of the Q&A and Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim for the 2024 Gareth Evans oration. That's the end of the photo opportunity for everyone, I think. And please travel safely home, and thank you for your presence here today.